Good morning to you. Hopefully you're able to hear, to see. This is being recorded on two instruments on my podcast. It's being recorded via the iMovie app that's on my iPad, and I'm looking in various places in regard to this and what I'm doing. There's an item that I have that says that an individual learns the most when they teach something. And I have something that I'm trying to learn. It's a major thing for me to learn what I am actually talking about this day. It's major. As a matter of fact, it says that if you listen to a lecture, you learn about 5%. If you read something, you learn about 10%. If you have it in audio visual, you learn about 20%. If you see a demonstration, that's about 30%. If you have a discussion, that's 50%. And then if you practically do it, then that's about 75% of retention in regard to what you're doing. But if you teach it to others, it's about 90%. And I'm at the point in my life where I really do need to learn that which I am reading, that which I am discussing, that which I am coming across in so many places. To learn it, to actually teach it to others is the vehicle that I am using to do that. So that's one of the reasons that I'm being prompted really to go about this process and to actually teach this. And there are so many things that I am learning, and that I really need to bring these out, really to move myself to the next level of experience as far as living is concerned. And it's major as far as I am concerned. I'm on a journey, no question about it. I'm on a very real journey as far as life is concerned. I want to mention that I've been a student of the Bible for a very long time at this point in my life. I have degrees galore. I said to my sons that I was the first of my mother's children to graduate from high school for various reasons. I have four older sisters, and one of them actually passed when she was in the 12th grade of high school, would have graduated from school. And then another one had a set of circumstances that prevented her, and all kinds of things that entered into our lives. And I won't go into them here, but I've talked with them about those things. We've had a number of discussions with my older sisters about the things that entered into our lives, and we talked with them. My sister is still, Bonnie, who's my oldest sister, is still alive, and I have conversations with her. Various things that I do in order just to understand me and to process material. But getting back to the aspect that I'm my mother's old mother and father's, as far as I know, the first child that graduated from high school. Not only did I graduate from high school, I have multiple degrees. Bachelor's degrees, master's degrees. I have a doctorate degree, doctorate in ministry to be exact. So I have multiple degrees. And so what I'm seeking to do is to actually understand various things to the point of application, to the point of those things bringing about specific results in my life and in the lives of others. And there's a particular item that I'm working with. It begins with the book of Galatians, which is one of the books written by the Apostle Paul. This particular book has a text, one particular text or a series of texts that Paul writes to the people of Galatians and Galatia. He is writing to them, and one of the texts says, Paul writes, I am crucified with Christ. So there's that experience that Paul is talking about. You may recall that Paul, when he meets this image of Jesus Christ on the road to Damascus, it is his conversion experience. But Paul says a number of times things like, I'm crucified with Christ. Another place he says, I die daily. But this particular time he writes, I am crucified with Christ. And then he says, nevertheless I live. And yet it's not I, but Christ lives in me. And the life I live now, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. So that's a very powerful text, especially when you combine that with the statement that Paul says later, where he says, I die daily. So it's not just one time, if you will, that Paul is talking about this experience of crucifixion or of dying. And he talks about I die daily, which means that he has a death and a rebirth, a death and a rebirth, a death and a rebirth that takes place in his life, which he says is on a daily basis. Now, if you take this aspect of dying and you put into it what death is on a physical sense, because Paul, no doubt, is talking about some kind of spiritual death or metaphysical death, whatever way you want to talk it, but put into it all the ingredients of really dying on a physical level and the type of release one has to give on a physical level. Like when you die, you release everything that you are connected with, everybody and everything, as far as I know, as far as death is concerned. If you've had a disagreement, that you died of that. If you've had an agreement, you died of that. You've had something that was unsettled, you died of that. All of those things, you died to those things. And then Paul says, nevertheless I live. And certainly, in my estimation of things, you don't bring those things back with you when you're born again, as the Bible speaks of that experience. On the one hand, again, when you speak of the aspect of Jesus the Christ, when he talks about it and speaking to Nicodemus, he says you must be born again. He does not mention the precursor to that born again experience, but Paul does. Paul says he talks about death. And then he talks about a born again. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. And so Jesus, when he's speaking to Nicodemus, just mentions that you must be born again. And Nicodemus, of course, according to the text, is confused when Jesus speaks about it. Because Nicodemus asks the question, how can a person enter back into the womb and be born again? Or how can a person enter back into the matrix and be born again, which is what the womb is. It's where you're put together and that kind of thing. And Paul, years later, actually goes through the process and talks about that. He says, I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet it's not I, but Christ lives in me. And the life I live now, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave his life for me. And so he talks about this aspect of having a faith like the Christ, a faith like the Christ. And then in other places, Paul says these key cryptic statements. He says, let us have the mind of Christ. Let us have the mind of Christ, or a mind like the Christ. And that's a major thing. In other places, just so that people were clear, he says we have the mind of Christ. And so this is a crucial thing that Paul is talking about. And how does one get the mind of Christ? And Paul fills that in as well. He says in Romans chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, he says, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. So Paul is filling in the blank so that individuals who really want this experience, that they are clear about that. So when a person is born again, there is a constant learning process that a person goes through, a constant learning process that a person goes through. And in my estimation, what takes place is that death, you release the old, that is bad, or what I say, you eat the meat, so to speak, but you throw away the bones. You keep what's good when you come forth into the new life. You actually keep what's good by memory, by remembering, which means to remember or re-put back together. You keep what's good, but you let go of so that you don't have an emotional attachment to that which is bad. You keep what's good. You remember that which is good, or you give new meaning to those old things so that they don't actually affect you in the way that they did previously, because you are able to see them in a totally different way. And so each person must work all of this stuff out in regard to that. Now, so you have this aspect in regard to that. If you follow me up to this point, then you're working with the aspect that the Apostle Paul has said, that there's an experience that a person has. He calls it crucifixion. He calls it death. And after this death, there is this resurrection experience. He says, I was crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live. So that's the resurrection experience or the born again experience in regard to that. Then he talks about this renewal of the mind. It is a retuning of the mind, a rebirthing of the mind again. And that's the major part that I really want to talk about in regard to this. It's a very powerful part in regard to this because you and I are becoming more and more to have the mind of the Christ. What does it mean to have the mind of the Christ? It means to think like Christ, to approach situations like Christ. Now, there's an interesting statement in the Bible that is so powerful. There are so many that are so powerful. But there's a statement in the Bible that says, God's eyes are too pure to see evil. Now, when you think about that, God's eyes are too pure to see evil. Then that statement tells us that God has never seen a sinner. Never seen a sinner. Never seen a sinner. To God, there's no such thing as a sinner. Never seen a sinner. If you recall the experience of Jesus and the woman caught in adultery, Jesus had never seen a sinner. Never seen a sinner. He actually says to the people, in regard to their situation, he who is without sin, cast the first stone. He was unaware in his present thinking situation of anything that would cause them to be able to stone that woman. Because his mind also had been changed. His mind, the Bible says, he grew. He grew as a person. The Bible says that over and over and over again in regard to that. And so there's this transformation that takes place in regard to a person as they are born again, as they come forth in regard to that. And so this is the process that is taking place, that is articulated in the Bible, the growth process that is taking place. It's in the Old Testament, in an experience like that of Jacob, who saw this ladder that came down. That's a growth experience. And over the course of his life, he grew in regard to his relationship with his brother, whom he had imitated and pretended that he was his brother when he was not. And his brother was upset and intended to kill him. But Jacob wrestled with the angel, and that was a test to say, have you changed enough in order to go back and meet your brother? And when he had guaranteed that he had changed enough, then he could meet his brother in peace. And so all of those things, those particular tests, those particular experience that he was having. And so that's what we're talking about in regard to this. It's a very powerful thing. Let me tell you, one of the places that I saw this aspect of understanding how this change takes place, again, it is right out of the book of Galatians, right out of the book of Galatians. And you can read these texts. The first text, when I said I'm crucified with Christ, that's Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. And you can look at that particular text and read it over and over and again, and then actually begin to understand and apply it to your life, how you want to ever to apply it to your life. If you want to, you could actually, again, we have a dialogue in regard to that. You can go to iwillrestore.com and send me an email, info@iwillrestore. I'm open to that. And then we've got web pages that you can have a dialogue from those web pages as well. We've got Facebook posts, got Facebook. I Will Restore is on Facebook. Spirit Victory Praises on Facebook. So there are a number of ways we can dialogue in regard to these particular items. But as we look at those items, again, the item that I'm working with is this aspect of, at the moment, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live. Yet it's not I, but Christ lives in me. The Christ lives in me. And then there's this growth that we are experiencing. You can call it growing in faith. You can also call it growing in self-knowledge and understanding. And the Bible says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So there's this growth process. There's another thing that's in the Bible, in the book of Galatians chapter 4, in verses 1 through 4, I believe it is. Actually, you can read on from that. And that very interesting statement works basically like this. That statement, Galatians chapter 4, verses 1 through 4, and you can read on from there. But better yet, let me just actually read it. This is reading it from the New Interpreter Study Bible, is what it's called. It says it's the New Revised Standard Version. Let me read it for you. Paul says, my point is this: as long as they are minors, meaning children, are no better than slaves, though they are the owners of all the property. But they remain under guardians and trustees until the date set by the Father. So with us, while we were minors, we were enslaved to the elemental spirits of the world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, in order to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as children. Let's keep going now. Verse 6, and because you are children, God sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a child. And if a child, then also an heir through God. Now, this again is part of this growth process that is being talked about. Paul is speaking here, same book, Galatians, same book, same powerful book. I'm going to read it again from another. This is Revised Standard Version, same version. I mean that an heir, as long as he is a child, is no better than a slave, though he is the owner of the estate. It says the child is treated, because he is a child, not an adult, as if that child is a slave. Now, take that in. Think about it as far as maturity is concerned. The child owns everything. Everything. If you want to just envision what that might mean, it could be all the universe. It could be all the earth. It could be a piece of land as wide as you might think that your father, being God, would give to you. It could be that you own everything that you can process in your own mind, your wildest dreams, if you will. You own all of that. But at the moment, according to the text, what is taking place is that rather than you functioning or me functioning as the owner, we're actually like what we would call a slave or an employee. So we've got managers that are over us, supervisors that are over us. Those individuals are telling us what to do, because we really don't know how to tell others what to do. Now, if you take that within the context of not necessarily directing people, if you will, if you're uncomfortable with that, take it in the context of directing your emotions or directing your thoughts or directing your energy and saying what to do. Directing yourself about what to do. And that's not far-fetched, because really that's what major religious and spiritual teachings are about. And I've studied a number of them. I don't know if you know about what they used to call a boogeyman and all of these other little monsters that we were afraid of. And that when they came, that we lost all control of ourselves, and we were afraid of this and afraid of that, afraid of thunder and lightning, afraid of all kinds of things, dead people rising from the grave and all of this stuff, and we would lose ourselves, afraid of each other, all kinds of things that we were afraid of. We were made to be afraid. Some were made to be afraid of learning, all kinds of things that we were made or taught to be afraid of. afraid of each other, sometimes of our neighbors, sometimes of people of different races, sometimes of people who spoke different languages. All kinds of things have already been placed inside of us to make us afraid. These are the elemental spirits that rule us, keep us from being at peace with ourselves and with others, and with the world that we live in. This is why it's relevant to this day to understand this. This is why it's relevant. It will cause individuals to harm themselves, bringing about some kind of addictions to various substances that are taken in excess, and cause a person to hurt him or herself, make him or herself sick. That making of yourself sick will make others rich because of the aspect that they are providing the substances that some people cannot, because they are physically addicted. Their bodies are physically addicted to various things. And those people supply those things and say if they wanted to stop, then they could stop. And I'm just supplying them with what they insist that they need. And so all of these things become vital to understand, because those people who are supplying those things are saying that if there was greater restraint on the part of the individuals, then those people could stop from being controlled. And they're right. They are absolutely right. That tells that the control is on the individual level first. And that's my concern. That's one of the reasons that I'm actually going through this process in regard to this now. Because this is something in 2020, as we look at protests and everything else, as we look at what is taking place in regard to police reform, all this kind of stuff, what is being stroked in regard to the relationship between the races, all of this stuff, this is something we have seen before. This is something we have seen before. Not only have we seen it in our own country, the United States of America, we've seen it around the world. We've seen it in South Africa. We've seen it in Europe. We've seen it around the world. We've seen it erupt in wars around the world. While the aspect of bringing individuals to the point that they understand that the major change that is needed and necessary is on the individual level. The best experience that I have seen where that is taking place initially takes place in India. Then it takes place in South Africa. South Africa was an amazing experience because not only were the people taught to refrain from violence, but there was actually violence as in almost a supplement to the refraining. The individuals who were violent made it necessary for those who were in government to choose which they wanted. And so my thing here in regard to this is for us to understand on an individual level, we have the ability to choose for ourselves how to bring a level of control to our lives and to our futures. How to bring a level of control to our lives and to our futures. Otherwise, as far as the universe is concerned, as far as God is concerned, as far as spirit is concerned, we are allowing ourselves to be minors or to be children or to be treated as slaves. Now, there's a time that we did not know or understand what we know and understand today. There is an item that I have, or many of you may know, that There's a period of time when I was in what is called today the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and there's a whole history in regard to that. And one of the teachers in that church was an individual named Ellen White. But she talks about a statement, or she makes a statement in one of her books, which was called Ministry of Healing. And in that book, she is talking about the aspect of what is called by others mind cure. William James, who was called the father of psychology in the West, actually uses those same words, those same two words, mind cure. You can look that up on the web. That's what we have today. You can look that up on the web. And she says in her book, and I'm going to go to break right after this, play a song. It is a law of nature. You might say it's a natural law that our thoughts and feelings are encouraged and strengthened as we give them utterance. Now, I'm talking now about growing after you've been born again, after you've been crucified and resurrected. And I'm equating crucified and resurrected is when you get to a point that you encounter a situation and you cannot do anything to prevent whatever the next action will be. And the next action that you're confronted with may be somebody actually taking your life. It could be that. You have released yourself not to a human, but to God. You've released it and said what the Bible says is, your will be done. I'm not going to fight this fight. There's something greater than I am that's going on here, and something greater than I am that has to step in and bring about the result that is intended here for me and for whoever is involved. And after that, if you're still here, if I'm still here, because I've had a few death-like experiences, and one of them has brought me to this place right here, right now. I've got some desires that I recognize that I need divine help in order to bring about. Divine help to bring about. It is a law of nature that our thoughts and feelings are encouraged and strengthened as we give them utterance. And then she says, while words express thought, it is also true that thoughts follow words. So she says, in effect, thoughts and feelings express get stronger. Then she says, turn that around. Turn that around. Speak first, but let your speaking be not necessarily how you feel at that moment, but let it be how you want to feel in the future, in the next moment, in the moment after that, in the moment, 10 moments after that, in a minute after that, in a day after that, in a year after that. Speak that. And say what you want and intend to be as far as the vision for your life. Speak that. And she says it will change how you feel and how you think. All right? That's what we're going to do with that. So we're going to stop that, come back in a moment. I'm going to go ahead with this particular item in regard to this moment and continue this presentation that we're doing. It is really, as I look at it, I'm looking at a number of individuals that I've been reading. I just mentioned the aspect that this person that I studied for a number of years talks about that it's a natural law. And I've tied that idea of a natural law now, to this statement that is in the book of Galatians, a natural law, something that's in nature that when you make that law work for you, that you can then use it in a beneficial way, as opposed to a law working almost to your demise. So on the one hand, you take it, and the law is that your thoughts and feelings, that when you express them, when you feel bad, you express and say, I feel bad, then you will feel worse. But if you change it and say, I feel good, and you may find one place, whether it's in your body, in your mind, wherever it may be, but you magnify that. Or maybe a thought from your past. It could be anything. It could be something that you saw on television, something that you heard on the radio, an experience that you heard as you listened to music. It could be anything that for a moment you feel good. And I think everybody can find a moment that they feel good, no matter how bad you may feel. Or others may come and help you in that moment to feel better. And what you do is that you magnify that by saying, I feel good. James Brown, you may recall, some of you may recall, and others of you can search YouTube. James Brown had a song called I Feel Good. And you can play that song and feel good. And as a result of that, you keep on saying, I feel good. Or see a movie, I feel good. See something that changes your mindset. And over and over and over again, you keep on changing your mindset, your mood, your feeling, and you keep speaking that. And it will change not only your mind, but your body. That's a natural fact. That's a law that will change you. The text in the Bible says, let the weak say, I am strong. That's right there in the Bible. Again, a book of natural law. A book of natural law. Over and over, the Bible speaks of natural things. It says, go to the ant. You know, all kinds of things that are there. What I'm talking about is like a seed principle. You start with a seed that you planted, and it's going to grow. It's going to grow and become what it already is at the DNA or the germ level. And so you feel good. You say you feel good. Seed level, very small, but then it will grow. And so it's same idea. Now, what I'm saying here is the next level of this is that I have found the same idea of a person who looks at natural law and they begin to articulate natural law and say again that this is a way to change your future. First place you notice that I said that I saw that was in the Bible. The Bible says that the children are treated a particular way because they are children. They are growing. Their minds are being transformed. They are treated as children, not because they are disliked or hated or whatever it may be. They are growing. They own the whole estate, but they must be able to manage it. That's the first place. For those who understood. Now, you got to grow up to be a certain age even to understand what was said there. And some people will say, well, that applies to the 10 Commandments. Yes, you could say that. And could apply to every other commandment that you might see. Every other law that you might see. That's why I said natural law. And when I look at it, there's an item that I read about people learning how to float a ship or to put a ship on the ocean so that it did not sink to the ground, because normally something that is heavier than the water would sink to the ground. But people who wanted to learn how to have ships go on the ocean did not study sinking, they studied floating. And they asked the question about how do we get things to actually float? And they did that by actually watching other things that floated. Now get that. This is so powerful. They didn't study things that sunk to the ground on water or went down to the bottom. They studied things that actually floated in order to learn how to make ships float. Get that? And the more they studied, they began to understand, as I understand it, what was called displacement. There is something about when water is displaced that the relationship between the water and the object, it makes it possible for a ship to float. Now, you could go study that. There's a whole science behind it, entire science. In the Bible, that's what was being talked about in cryptic language. Natural science. That's what Einstein did when he said E equals mc squared. Natural science. It is a law of nature, she said. There are other laws of nature. Other laws of nature. My parents used to say, birds of a feather flock together. Birds of a feather flock together. And of course, that sounds like she's talking about birds. It says birds of a feather flock together. Took me years to understand. years to understand that what was being talked about was more than birds. It was talking about people. And later, after 2009, 2008 and 9, there was this thing called the law of attraction. It said like attracts like. And you begin to understand that people actually like being around others like them. People who think like them. And you look at that and begin to understand the ramifications of that. And then you have the aspect of opposites attract. Same kind of thing, but differently. And you understand that whole aspect. Birds of a feather flock together. Opposites attract. Different application, same idea. But you begin to understand that there are affinities that are involved with things and with people as to why people like being with one another. And then using that knowledge in order to enhance your life so that you're not a slave and that you're someone who knows how it is. It's called today emotional intelligence. It's amazing. Again, an entire science. An entire science. The same thing occurs when you have airplanes flying. The theory of thermodynamics. An entire set of laws. Different from, I think it was Newton that dropped an item to the ground. Laws of thermodynamics deal with in the things flying. Now, when it comes to spiritual laws, the same thing applies. The same thing applies. There's some people who are still stuck in the old laws. They don't understand that there's a higher level of laws in regard to that. There's still some people, in my estimation again, who have not even ascended to the laws that deal with human beings to understand that we are all God's children. And they are trying to say, well, this is a good person, or this is a person who, however they may describe it as good, or one of our kind, or whatever it may be. As opposed that we are all God's children. We are all God's children. All God's children. The Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States of America is based on that idea. The individuals that studied, I think it was Hume and Locke and others, these philosophers, they wrote that statement that says, we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. No matter what those individuals wrote about the aspect of this 3/5 of a man, all that other foolishness that they were dealing with because of their own biases and their own actions. And some of them had only grown as far as they could grow. They were just coming out of, their forebears were just coming out of the oppressions that they had experienced in England and other places in Europe themselves. They had just recently come to the United States of America, or what was this new land. And it wasn't a new land to the Native Americans who were here. It was a new land to them. They had just recently come here. They were trying to fight to stay alive here, not realizing perhaps that some of the things they were doing were harmful to other people, other humans, the Native Americans, and perhaps even not caring in regard to that. But they were fighting their way in everything in regard to that. And it's time really for America in the world to tell a true history of the evolution of humankind, a true history, and be unafraid of that. Because we are evolving. We're becoming who we are. And that is, we're children of God. All of us are children of God. All of us are children of God. And that will not stop. That will not stop. That evolutionary process will not stop. And that's becoming clear and clear and clear in regard to that. And so These natural laws, people are looking at them and then they're putting them together. And now we have rockets and spacecraft and things of that nature. They're landing rovers on asteroids because they can calculate the speed of an asteroid and the speed that a rover or a satellite needs to take in order to travel to these places and to be, just precise. I say that people have a theology that's rooted in something that somebody discovered thousands of years or 100 years or whatever it may be ago, but they're walking around with smartphones. It's amazing. They've got an old theology, but a new smartphone. It's amazing to me. Anyway, it's amazing to me. And what I'm saying in regard to this is that I've recognized I've had to grow because of various experiences in life. I say to people that you begin to understand, perhaps for me, I say we were calling God our Father. And it's something to consider God as a mother or as a caring parent, whether it's a mother or a father. I encountered a father in one of my experiences as a minister, and the church had a way that it would deal with individuals who were not coming to church or who did things that were contrary to what were considered the doctrines of the church, all of this kind of thing. And one of the ways was to vote a person, as we called it, out of the church. And there was this one father who had a daughter, and that he would just refuse to allow us to vote that daughter out of the church. Refuse. And the entire family would fight for that daughter. And it was something. I thought of God as a mother and how mothers will, when she's pregnant, that a mother's womb will grow and enlarge in order to encapsulate or provide a safe place for that child, no matter what the child is. The child could be, I mean, could have all kinds of challenges, deformities, if you will, or things that are not right as far as that child. But whatever it is, that mother body will accommodate that child and fight internally for that child to be born alive, to be born well. And certainly God is like that. We are in God, the text says. We're in God, and God is in us. And I see God really everywhere fighting for us, making sure that we're all right. And so this is one of the things that I think of when I think of God. And God does not try to say that this is a good one or this is a bad one or whatever. And I like what the poet says, God is closer to us than breathing, nearer than our hands and feet. That's Tennyson. And all of nature is alive. This is my Father's world, the song says. This is my Father's world. And to our listening ears, all nature sings and around me rings the wonders of his spears. We begin to understand that everything is alive with God. Everything expresses God. If we would but listen, if we would but hear, if we would but see. Again, the Bible speaks of this, and sacred texts speak of this. It's vital that we understand it. And that we arrive at the point where we see how we are to live in harmony with nature, and to make it work for our benefit, to make it work. And again, please understand that I'm moving myself through this process. And I did a study on a book called Steps of Christ. And again, this person that I mentioned earlier, Ellen White, said nature and revelation alike testify to the love of God. Nature and revelation. She said that. You can call it inspired, you can call it whatever you want. She said nature and revelation, natural laws. And then I've also studied individuals. One of the latest that I'm studying is a person named Thomas Throwood. I call him a mystic, a metaphysician, a mental scientist, whatever you want to call him. His reasoning process is so powerful to me because it's step by step by step by step by step. It is so powerful to me. And I go through it and read it over and over again. There's a book called The Edinburgh Lectures on Mental Science. And I'm reading those, and one of the things that takes place as I have read these materials over and over again is really that God is universal. God is universal. I'm in God, God is in me. And God, there's a place where he talks about the aspect of that we're in this infinite intelligence, and he calls it an ocean of infinite intelligence. And I've decided to call it the wonderful waters of infinite intelligence because I'm a waters, and I have had dreams about waters and being in the waters. Wonderful waters of infinite intelligence. And that there are laws that one should not violate. And yet, when one works with those laws, when one knows and works with those laws, that the infinite intelligence will provide one with anything and everything their hearts desire. That's a profound statement. That is just a profound statement. No limits. No limits. Now, let me just say again, because as I said earlier, that there is this person, because I studied, I was within the Seventh-day Adventist Church as a minister for 15 years, and I studied this, and I've arrived at the point where I recognize that there are many people who say many things that if you study them enough, you'll discover that they are saying the same thing, just using different words, in my estimation. So here's a quote again from White. She says, as the will of man cooperates with the will of God, it becomes omnipotent, all-powerful. Whatever is to be done at his command may be accomplished in his strength. All his biddings are enablings. That's no better than what I read in the writings of Thomas Throwood, Troward. It's differently stated, but no better. As the will of man, as the will of Dennis L. Waters cooperates with the will of God, it becomes omnipotent. Whatever is to be done at his command, God's command, may be accomplished in God's strength. All his biddings are enablings. There is this very powerful idea. Now, these things will seem like, they can seem like they're just crazy statements, except a person understands how to bring them about. How do you do it? And to do that, what you do is that you, at least for me, what I do is that I keep reading. I keep studying. I keep listening. I have teachers. I keep going to school. I keep practicing. And of late, what I recognize is that what is being changed is me. What is being changed is me. And I've gone to learn over the course of time about what is called consciousness, or it could be called awareness. I have developed what we call the 8 A's of awareness, 8 A's of transformation or transformation. And my experience with that is that I was in school, Howard University School of Divinity, and I was studying, and it was something that was just given to me. It was just given to me. I studied. I wrote a book. I'd be glad to give you a copy of it. It's dealing with the recovery. It's called Ministry of Healing, I believe. I have a copy of it right here, called I Will Restore. It's turned around. You should have a mirror image in order to look at it. But this is the book, Ministry of Healing. I Will Restore, Ministry of Healing to African American male survivors of prepubescent physical and sexual abuse. So that's what the book is. I did that at Howard University School of Divinity. So I was studying my own experience as far as life is concerned. I've turned that into a ministry that deals with trauma. And beyond trauma, what we're talking about is the aspect if you want to be someone not just simply who survives, but someone who thrives. If you want to be someone who goes on and, say, build a business, because what takes place is that an individual, once they reach out and want to grow and to become more than they ever were, is that the old inner monsters, if you will, that are inside, because that's the only place monsters really exist, is those things will come up. And they will tell you things like you're not worthy and that you shouldn't have. And if you've been poor, they'll tell you should not be rich, not knowing that you've always been rich because God is rich and God is your father and all of those kind of things. But those things will come up. And others will actually tell you and try to hold you back. They can be relatives, friends, and everything else in regard to that. But they don't know who you really are because they've got a surface understanding of who you are. And you may have a surface understanding of who you are. And so this is a deep dive. And that's what we're talking about, is understanding who you really are. And that's what the book is about, is that going deeper and deeper and deeper so that you can go higher and higher and higher. That's what the book is really about. And so I wrote this book with this aspect of going deeper inside of me, understanding deep, 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 deep stuff about myself. But the deeper I got, the more I understood God. The more I understood God. And that's what I mean when I say this aspect that I begin with. I am crucified with Christ. It was after all kinds of, not just past traumas, it was after traumas that had happened in my life. Fires from jobs, all kinds of things that were painful. And rather than striking out, I went deep within. I went deep within. And the more I went deep within, the deeper I went within, the more I was introduced to God. And the more I understood the love of God and the power of God, that God is omniscient. He's known me all of my life. And like he said to Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. I've known you all of your life. Before you were even born, I knew you. I had a plan for your life, and that's what God is saying to you, whoever you may be, because it's universal. I knew you, not just everybody. I knew you as an individual. I've never seen you as the person that others may describe you to be. And so that's why you get to the point where rather than defining yourself from what you're feeling like or what you're thinking or what others may say about you, you begin to redefine yourself. That's that resurrection. You begin to redefine yourself as who you know yourself to be from God's perspective. The book of Jeremiah tells about Jeremiah in Lamentations tells about Jeremiah being put in the dungeon. He was considered a criminal by the king. But Jeremiah considered himself to be a prophet of God. And he spoke as such, no matter how the king treated him, no matter how others treated him. He was a prophet of God. And that's what he spoke as. You can find that. And even at the end, when Jerusalem was destroyed, Jeremiah wrote the book of Lamentations. And Jeremiah had preached for 40 years. He had told the people that destruction is coming. He stood up and told them destruction is coming. He didn't just march down the street and all this kind of stuff. He told kings that the destruction is coming. He said, you're wrong in what you're doing. They would not listen to Jeremiah. They persecuted Jeremiah, talking about losing their jobs. They tried to kill him, put him in a mud dungeon, up to his neck in mud. And when destruction came, Jeremiah walks through the city and he cries like a baby. And God tells him, in my estimation, Lamentations 3:20 and following, he says, this I recall to my mind. Therefore have I hope. And I believe that God basically said to him, shut up, stop crying. This I recall to my mind, therefore I have hope. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed. It is because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. That's what Jeremiah said. I think, again, that's what's going on today. That's what's going on today. God is waiting for individuals to change. He'll change society when we change on the individual level. That's my hope for this moment that we're in. And what on the individual level? First, we become conscious of who we are. We know our own existence, the conditions, the sensations, and the mental operations that we go through. And I didn't originate this. I had to become conscious of my own experiences in life. We know that when we perceive something, we become a watcher, an observer of things. First of all, we find what it means to be the individual, what it means to be me. Get to that point. What is unchangeable about me? God in me. Unchangeable about me. And then we watch that which changes around me. What changes around me. And some of the things that we decide that are unchangeable becomes our ethics, our values, our beliefs. We find where we want to anchor ourselves. We become conscious of those things. Where do we want to anchor ourselves? What are our ethics, our values, our beliefs? We go through a process where we understand what those things are. And that's what the whole aspect of spiritual growth is about. Understanding those. And then once we know and understand these things, then we go through the process of observing how life is, and then how it is that while we remain the same, anchored, how it is that things around us change, how that takes place. And so we pay attention to those things that are changing, that are ever changing around us, the conditions, the circumstances, the people, and all of those things. We pay attention to those things. And then we decide, what gives us joy? In light of a changing society, what gives us joy? What is our bliss? And part of the blissfulness of life is following one's purpose. What am I sent here for? Why am I here? So when you have your identity, you know that you're here for a purpose. There's a reason why each of us are here at this particular time. And following one's bliss is living one's life on purpose. That's what I want to do. And then from all of that, you discover wisdom. All of that, you discover wisdom. And again, that's a profound process. That's a profound process. That's part of what, and there are different authors, there are different people who, again, have discovered this. I'm looking at a number of them, reading their material, coalescing it together, making sure that I have an understanding of it. Now, as I said, in order to grow to the next level, it seems that I've got to teach it. And that's what I'm doing in regard to this. God bless you. Take care. I'm going to just play some music here that's on my computer, and it's also being recorded, as I said, in this live set. This is called Inspiring Motivational Emotional. And so listen to this, and we'll see. Take care. Bye-bye. As I've said, I read a great deal. My reading is based on the aspect of individuals who speak about natural law. There are persons like individual who does a wonderful thing with the imagination. There is Thomas Thurwood. There's Ernest Holmes. There is people like Mary Baker Eddy, Emma Curtis Hopkins, and I'm comparing where do they merge together in regard to natural law. What is it that they are saying that really converses together so that I see from many different perspectives? I believe that we're all God's children, and that I believe that the Spirit is letting us all grow up to become those who have the mind of Christ. I believe that this statement where it says that whatever it is that each of us is to do, when we cooperate with God, we become omnipotent. Omnipotent, it says. Omnipotent. I didn't write that. I believe it. Whatever is to be done at God's command. And that's, you can pray for me and pray and ask that whatever I'm doing that is according to God's will, because as I read the records of the people in the past, people who are doing God's will in Jeremiah and others, in their time, they listened to but this material just really blesses my heart. I thank God for the dying, for the resurrections, for the experience that I have. As the will of man cooperates with the will of God, as the will of them it becomes a liberty. Whatever is to be done in God's command, maybe a good push in history. All God's goodness. That's what I want God to do to do what I do. And that's what I'm doing. God bless you. God take care. I pray that you too will do what God has called upon you. You can email me info@iwillrestore.com. Hopefully you will begin to pay attention to some of this material and it will bless you. Be God's person always. Keep his image in your heart and grow into all that God intends for you to be and do and have. Take care. Bye-bye.